We continue now at the top of Daf Tesam and Beis Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 9b. On the previous summit, the Gemara brought the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua that im ein basar ein dam, im ein dam ein basar, meaning to say if you have an animal carbon, let's say there's not a kezayis of meat, or there's not a kezayis of chaylev that's being burned on the mizbeach, so then the dam, the blood, cannot be thrown. And the Brisa also mentioned that this is true by mincha as well. Even if there's an entire mincha, the blood cannot be thrown. And the Gemara now interrupts and asks, mincha may avidita, what are we even talking about mincha? By a karma mincha, there is no blood. Rashi explains, mincha may avidita, may zrika yesh b'mincha, what throwing of the blood is there by a karma mincha? And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Papa says, minchas nesachim. We're talking here about minchas nesachim. That's a mincha and libations that come along with an animal carbon. And so Salgadayt Chamina, one might have thought, Hoel v'hadei zevach asya, since it's accompanying the animal that's being slaughtered, the animal carbon, and so therefore, even if in terms of the carbon of the animal itself, there's no chaylev, there's no basar, and the blood can't be thrown, but maybe the fact that the mincha remains is enough to throw the blood. Ki gufei de zevach damya, because it's considered part of the carbon itself. So Kamash Malon, that's what the Bryce is teaching. The fact that the mincha is intact is not a reason that the blood can be thrown. And Rashi explains, b'minchas nesachim, by minchas nesachim, haboim im hazevach. Again, that's where the mincha and the libations accompany a zevach, accompany an animal carbon. Im avad chaylev ubasar shal zevach, if the chaylev and the basar of the zevach are lost, umincha kayemis, but the mincha is still around, lo yizrok hadam in a mincha, one shouldn't throw the blood on account of the carbon mincha. And on the previous summit, the Gemara brought a machlokas amuroim between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Within the Shit Shua, again, Rabbi Yeshua is saying, Emein basar ein dam, if there's no meat, so then the blood of the carbon cannot be thrown. Similarly, by carbon mincha, if there's no shirayim, if there's no remainder, then the kometz is not burned. But the machlokas amuroim was, let's say, shirayim shechasru bein kamitza lahaktar. Let's say the kometz was taken, and then the shirayim are just missing some, but some of the shirayim, some of the remainder of the carbon mincha is still there. So then is the kometz able to be burned? Reish Lakish said, Puzzle, it's disqualified, one cannot burn the kometz, and Rabbi Yochanan said one can burn the kometz, and so the Gemara now explains that machlokas, Uman de Puzzle, the one who disqualifies, that refers to Reish Lakish. So Shani Hach, it's different over here. The Amar Kra, because the Pasuk says, Vehirim hakoin min ha-mincha, esaz karasa v'hikter ha-mizbecha, and we understand from that Pasuk, ha-mincha ad di'isa lekula mincha lo yakter, unless you have the entire mincha, it should not be burned. In other words, according to Reish Lakish, even though it's shirayim shechasru, just some of the shirayim is missing, that's enough of a reason that one does not burn the kometz. That's what the pasuk means over here when it says again, v'hir ma'koim min ha-mincha has karasa v'hikter ha-mizbecha. It means you have to have the kula mincha, you have to have the entire mincha in order to burn the kometz. V'idach, and the other opinion that refers to Rabbi Yochanan, min ha-mincha, mincha shahai sakvar, it means the carbon mincha that was already there. And we'll read the parentheses as well. Shleima b'shas kmitza yakter, if at the time of the kometz it was whole, so then the kometz can be burned. Afagav dehashta eino shleima, even though now it's not whole, even though some is missing right now, again Rabbi Yochanan says still the kometz can be burned. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan the Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan asked Reish Lakish a question from the following brisa. This brisa was mentioned earlier. Ad shelo pirka nifras lachma, if before the bread was removed from the shulchan, the bread broke, which is a case of chaser, essentially where some went missing. So then halechem pasel, the bread is disqualified. Vein makter all of us habazichin, one is not allowed to burn on its account the bazichin, which are the spoons of frankincense. V'im mishapirka nifras lachma, but if after it was removed from the shulchan, this would be the same as bein kamitza lahaktara, essentially by a carbon mincha between the fistful and the burning of the kometz. So here, after the bread was removed from the shulchan, then nifras lachma, then the bread broke, then it was shirayim shechasru. So then halechem pasel, the bread is still pasel, that's still disqualified. However, umakter all of us habazichin, one is allowed to burn on its account the bazichin, and so you see that the kometz can be burned in the case of shirayim shechasru bein kamitza lahaktara. The kometz is allowed to be burned. That's a question against Reish Lakish. V'yamar Rebbe Elazar, and Rebbe Elazar says lo pirka mamish, when we say that it's removed, it doesn't actually have to be removed from the table. Elakevan sheigias man lefarik, as long as the time came to remove it. V'afal pisha lo pirka, even though it wasn't actually removed. This part, according to Rashi, is not necessary to bring Rebbe Elazar in terms of the question, but Rebbe Elazar just explains the brisa in in this fashion. But in any case, again, this Bryce is a question against Reish Lakish. And the Gemara continues, Amar Le, Reish Lakish said back to Rabbi Yochanan, Hamani Rabbi Eliezer, who's the author of this Brysa? It's Rabbi Eliezer. We already said on the previous Amud that the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish is only within Rabbi Yoshua. Within Rabbi Yoshua, if the entire mincha goes missing, so then Rabbi Yoshua says that is going to be puzzle, and so then the question is, what if it's just chaser? It's not the entire thing missing, not the entire thing destroyed. But Rabbi Eliezer says that even when the entire thing is missing or destroyed, still we say that one can burn the komets, and so therefore this brisa is simply following Rabbi Eliezer. There was no machlokas within Rabbi Eliezer. Amar Lei said back to him, Ani amino loch Mishnah Shleimer. Rabbi Yochanan said back to Reish Lakish, I'm giving you this full brisa, v'amrit liat Rabbi Eliezer, and you're trying to answer that it follows Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Eliezer, if it really followed Rabbi Eliezer, my ear Yenifras, why give a case where it's broken, where it's just chaser? Afilu sarif v'yovid nami machsher. Again, like we just said, even if it's totally burned, totally lost, Rabbi Eliezer says that it's kosher, that one would be able to burn the bazichin in this case. So therefore it doesn't make sense to say this brisa is Rabbi Eliezer. And the Gemara says, Ishtik, he was silent, he did not have an answer for this brisa. But the Gemara continues and asks, why is he silent? We have a different answer. Leimoleit, Tzibor Shani, he should say to him that when it comes to the lechem haponim, that's communal. And by a tzibor, by communal, it's different. Hoel v'ishtri tumah legabayo, since in general, tumah is permitted by a tzibor. So ishtri nami chasera, so when something is missing also, we should say that is permitted. Why not answer the brisa in that fashion? And the Gemara continues, Amar Ravada Barava says, Zos Omeris, this proves, hachisaron kebal mum dami, when something is missing, that's the equivalent, let's say, by an animal carbon of a blemish. Ve'ein bal mum betzibur, there is no permission for blemishes by communal offerings, and so therefore it's the same thing. We wouldn't say that the fact that it's a communal offering allows chisaron, that would not be allowed. And Rashi explains, Mishnah Shlema means Stam Mishnah. It's an unattributed Mishnah. There's no Tana that is specified in this Brisa. Mishtri Tumah Legabayo, again by its Tzibor, Tumah is permitted. Dechsib B'Tamid, it says it's written by the Karban Tamid B'Moado in its time. Umashma Afilu B'Shabbos V'Tumah, it's Mashma even on Shabbos, even in Tumah, that's going to be permitted. Zos Omeris, this proves Midalo Shani Hachi, from the fact that he didn't give this answer. Shma Mina Chesron Kabal Mum Dami, we see that if it's missing, that's the equivalent of a blemish. Ve'ein Bal Mum Shari B'Tzibor Tvei we don't find that Baal Mum is more permitted by communal offerings more than an individual. Hilka chisaron debein kmitza la'aktara. Therefore, if something goes lacking between kmitza and aktara, you have a pasal b'yachid, have a pasal nami b'tzibur. If it's disqualified by an individual, it's disqualified also by the community. Hilkach ishtik. For that reason, therefore, he was silent. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Yosef Rav Papa v'kamar lashmaita. Rav Papa sat and he said over this teaching, and Rashi explains lashmaita di ishtik, meaning the fact that he was silent. V'lo shani leit tzibor shani, the fact that he didn't answer that by the communal carbon, by the tzibor, it's different. He said this over. Amar le Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef said to him, and the Shinui Nuschos takes out the words Bar Shamei Rav Papa. Again, Rav Yosef said to him, Milo askinan Rav Yochanan v'Reish Lakish b'minchas ha'omer. This machlokas between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, isn't it also by a carbon mincha? Let's say, for example, like the minchas ha'omer, that tzibor which is communal upligi, and they would still be arguing. Who's to say that this machlokas Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish is only b'yachid and not b'tzibor? And Rashi explains, Milo askinan plugsa d'leil. This earlier machlokas, t'chinami kamer Reish Lakish ein maktirin kometz aleim. When Reish Lakish said that we don't burn the komets in this case by shirayim shechasru, b'minchas tzibor nami omer, he would say that by a communal mincha, kagon bazichim de lechem aponim, for example, by the bazichim of the lechem aponim that were just mentioned. Aren't we talking about that as well? And the Gemara continues, Amar of Malkio says, Tana Chada was taught in one brisa, Misalta, the pasuk says, Misalta from the flour, Shim Chasra Kol Shu Psula, it means to say that if anything is missing, it's disqualified, Mishamna from its oil, Shim Chasra Kol Shu Pasal, if any amount is missing, it's pasal, it's disqualified. Vitanya Idach, and we learned in another brisa, Vahano Seres Min HaMincha, what remains from the mincha, Prat LeMincha Shechasra Hi, again it excludes a mincha which is lacking, Vishachasra Komtza, where the komets is lacking, Vishalo Hikter Milovona, if he didn't burn from its frankincense at all. And so Trey Kroy b'chaseros lamali, says Rav Malkiah, why do we need two different psukim to teach this idea of chaseros if something is missing? Lav chad lemincha shechasra kodem kmitza. Isn't one pasuk talking about a karva mincha where it was chaser before the kmitza? There was a machlokas Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish over there as well. Rabbi Yochanan said that it can be refilled. Reish Lakish says it cannot. V'chad l'shirayim shechasra ben kmitza l'aktara. And the other pasuk is, let's say you have the remainder after the komets was taken. taken between the Kmitza and the Haktara, by the remainder it was Chasr, something went missing. There also again, Machlokas Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, and Rabbi Yochanan was the one who was lenient. Utiyufta Rabbi Yochanan B'Tarvayu, and then it ends up that we have now refuted both leniencies of Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara says, lo, no, not necessarily. Chad lemincha shechasra kodem kmitza. One is talking about a mincha that went missing, it's lacking before kmitza. Di mevi mi beso v'yimalena in, and that just means to say if he brings from his house and refills it, yes, which Rabbi Yochanan said is what he should do. Vi lo, and if not, then it is not good. So that's consistent with Rabbi Yochanan. V'chad l'shiraim shechasra ben kmitza la'aktara, and the other pasuk is talking about a remainder again that some went missing between kmitza and haktara. The afal gav demakter kometz alein, and that pasuk simply means even though one does burn the kometz on their account, like Rabbi Yochanan, but osan shirayim asurim la'achila, but those shirayim, the remainder, it's still usher to eat that remainder. The boilhu, because they asked the following question: L'divrei ha'omer shirayim shechasru ben kmitza la'aktara, according to the one who says that by the remainder that some goes missing between kmitza and haktara, between taking the fistful and the burning, makter kometz alein, that one is allowed to burn the kometz on their account. Osan shirayim mahin ba'achila, but the remainder is one allowed to eat it. Amar Zeiri says, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, v'hanoseres, that which remains, v'lo hanoseres min hanoseres, not that which remains from that which remains. Again, meaning to say one should not eat that remainder. For Rabbi Yanai, Amar Rabbi Yanai says, meha mincha, it says from the mincha shahai sakvar, the mincha that was already, since it was whole before, one is allowed to eat from the remainder. And Rashi explains, noseres min hanoseres, the remainder of the remainder, demitchila hayu kol hashirayim noseres min hakometz. Originally, all of the remainder is considered the remainder of the kometz. Ukeshechasru shirayim, and when the remainder goes missing, some of that, hayu hanosarim, whatever remains is shirei shirayim, is the remainder of the remainder. And then the Gemara brought Rabbi Yanai, meha mincha shahai sakvar. Rashi explains, shahai sakvar b'shas hakometz. If at the time of the kometz haisa shleima was whole, afal pi shechasra ben kmitza, even though some went missing between the kmitza and the haktara, karina be v'hanoseres min hamincha, we still say it's v'hanoseres min hamincha, and it can be eaten according to this. Polig Rabbi Yanai ad Zeiri. According to this, there's a machlokas here between Zeiri and Rabbi Yanai, and Rashi continues with another explanation of Rabbi Yanai. Lishna achrin, another way of understanding Rabbi Yanai, shahaisa kvar b'shas haktara, what was already at the time of the burning. V'hachi mashma, according to that, it's understood as follows: v'hanoseres min hamincha shahaisa shleima kvar b'shosh and nasu elu shirayim. If it was whole at the time when it became shirayim, so then yochlu Aaron uvanav, so then Aaron and his children can eat it. Aval lo yochlu osam shirayim shenasu shirayim mi mincha chaser, but you can't eat the remainder that's a remainder from a mincha that's chaser, that would not be allowed. V'hainu d'zeiri, according to this approach, Rabbi Yanai is essentially saying the same thing as zeiri, that shirayim shechasru ben kmitza l'haktara cannot be eaten, umashmos dorshan ika benayu, they would just be arguing over the understanding of the psukim. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Kometz b'smol, if he takes the kometz, the fistful, with his left hand, then it is disqualified. The Gemara says, Meno hanimili, from where do we know this? Amar Rabbi Zeira says, the Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, Vayakre v'samincha v'yamale kapo mimena, it says he brings the mincha, he fills his hand with it, talking about the taking of the kometz. Kaf zeh eini yodei mao, I don't know what kaf, what palm are we talking about? Are we talking about the right or the left? Kishu omer v'lokach hakoin milok hashomen, v'yotzak al kaf hakoin hasmolis, when it says in the pasuk, by the purification of the mitzorah, the Kohen takes from the log shaman, from the log of oil, and pours on the left hand, on his left hand, kan smolis, so here it's the left, hakol makom shenemar kaf, but any other time that it says the word kaf, like it says again, vayimale kapo mimena, eino elo yamin, it means the right. The Gemara asks, v'hami boile lagufe, but isn't the pasuk, when it says al kaf hakohen hasmolis, isn't it needed for the context of the pasuk itself? It's trying to say that it should be done with the left hand over here. Who says that we should learn to other cases that it means the right? The Gemara says no, smolis achrinaksiv, it actually says left. Another time it says a second time over there, and therefore again we understand that over here it's the left, and nowhere else, everywhere else it's the right. But the Gemara still asks, Ve'ema ein miyot achar miyot ela l'rabos, why don't we say if you have two exclusions, it says left twice, so if you have a miyot achar miyot, an exclusion following another exclusion, it actually is not an exclusion at all, it's actually an inclusion. The Gemara says no, smolis achrinaksiv, it actually says smolis smolis, it says left a third time. And so therefore, again, we learn kan smolis ve'in acher smolis. Over here, it's the left. In other cases, it's not the left. The Gemara continues and asks, ve'ema adrab, why don't we say on the contrary? Ma kan smolis af bi'al manami smolis, just like over here, it's the left. We should extend that to other cases and say left applies in other places as well. And the Gemara says, arba smolis ksivi. It actually says smolis four times. Trei ba'ani, trei ba'asher. It says it 2 times by the poor mitzora, 2 times by the wealthy mitzora. And so therefore, again, we learn left over here and not in other cases. But the Gemara continues and asks, Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Zeira. Rabbi Yirmiyah said to Rabbi Zeira, al boen yado hayemonis, val boen raglo hayemonis. It says that it's applied to the right thumb and the right big toe of the mitzora. So dechsiv, that which is written b'shemin the mitzora usher, by the oil of the wealthy mitzora. Lamali, why do we need that pasuk? And Rashi explains, Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Zeira. Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Zeira, Kevon de darasht kol smolis the mitzora. If you're darshaning all these times it says left by the mitzora, darash nami al boen yado hayemonis val boen raglo hayemonis, bein b'shemin mitzora asher bein bani. We should darshan also when it says boen yado hayemonis and boen raglo hayemonis. We should darshan that whether by the shemin of the mitzora of the wealthy one or of the poor mitzora. Lamali, what do we need it for? Kevon dechsiv al dam ha'asham. Since it says on the place where the blood of the asham is placed, yiten es Hashem, and that's where the oil is placed. Anoyadana dal yado hayemonis. Don't I already know that it's on the right hand? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Amud Aleph.